Good morning, everybody. I really wanted to talk a little bit about the play. I know it might be a little confusing for some of you guys, but you've already made it through Act 1, Scene 1, and I want to kind of touch on who the characters are. So, yesterday I did ask for you guys to go through your journal and kind of start identifying their positive and negative traits and maybe identifying their role in the story. So, I'm going to kind of fill in some of that information just in case you didn't grab it when you were reading. And I know that some of the characters were a little hard to grasp. I hope that you've been reading the italicized pieces, the pieces in parentheses, because all of that kind of tells you a little bit about how they're supposed to be acting. Obviously, it doesn't say, directly like he looked at them angrily, right? So instead of saying he looked at them angrily, they put in parentheses angrily so that you know that that's how that's being done. So let me pull up the story real quick just so you get a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. So starting from the very beginning, we know that we're in Scotland. There's been a murder. Mrs. Maureen Lyon has been murdered in Paddington, which is of course completely separate from the actual setting of the story, which is Monkswell Manor. That's a guest house. One of the biggest things that I think most of us don't know, because of course we weren't around in the early 1900s, was that people would go to guest houses or these hotels, right? And they would stay for a month. Sometimes they would stay for longer. Sometimes they didn't even have a home. They would go from hotel to hotel to hotel, just staying out their life. Usually it was older people, kind of like Mrs. Boyle, which I don't know if you caught that as you were reading, but she is a little bit older. She's definitely very grouchy. But I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And then you, of course, have some people who are just passing through. Some people who just need a place to stay, maybe for a week, and then they're going on, maybe because it's a job, maybe they're just traveling, whatever. But all of these people, of course, are very different. We've got very young people in the house, and then we've got two slightly older people in the house. The owners of this guest house are Molly and Giles Ralston. They are a married couple. This is their very first time putting together a home for hotel use. Of course, her husband Giles is very how could I say, like he's just pessimistic in a way. He likes to think that everything is going to go wrong. Molly, of course, is a little naive. She just prefers to think that everything's perfect, everything's going to go right, and if not, she'll figure out a way to fix it. She specifically says that if they don't pay her, well, then they'll hold on to their luggage. It's a little conniving, a little cunning, but hey, she does what she needs to do. She's a very clever girl, according to the way she's described in the story. They do have their very first tenant, I guess I could say, Christopher Wren. So I don't know if you caught it, but I'm going to give you a little bit of insight on Christopher. Christopher is hyperactive and he's a jokester. He likes to play the card. He likes to make people angry just a little bit so that he can get a good laugh out of it. You see him right away when he comes into the story just talking, very ADHD, I guess you could say, very hyperactive. And he's like, oh, I love this and I love that and I like that, but that's a fake. Oh, but this is great, right? Like he's just like bouncing back and forth and all over the place. And then before Molly can even tell him anything else, he's like, oh, can I go through this door? And he like walks out into the library, right? He's a mess. He's a hot mess, so to speak. And then he comes back in. He's just talking about all the things that they have in the house, kind of questioning why she's made certain decisions in the house rather than just like letting it be. And then at one point, when he talks about the mahogany table, he looks at Giles, and this is that moment where you kind of see him playing the jokester, because when he talks about the table, he tells Giles, "Oh, but you would need a strong husband, right?" So like he's pushing buttons because he knows that Giles probably is a man who doesn't want to be told that he's not a strong, virile husband. Um, and then as they go, he starts to kind of flirt with Molly, saying, "Oh man, I'm definitely going to adore your wife. She's very sympathetic, right?" Like he's talking to Giles about this, and Giles does not like him at all, one bit. He's like, "This is not the guy for me. I do not like this guy." And then he goes on to insult him even further when he says that he gives a compliment to Molly, and Molly's like, "Oh no, 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 you don't have to compliment me." And he's like, "Would you look at that? Because you've got a boorish husband, a stubborn, strong husband, you become submissive and you can't even accept a compliment." And so he's very button pushing. So of course Giles doesn't like him. Molly's like, "Oh my God, let's hurry up. I don't want to get into an argument. Like you go to your room." Next character we meet is, of course, Mrs. Boyle. Mrs. Boyle is quite old, probably in her 60s. Um, She is aloof. She's very haughty, very like everything should be my way or no way. And she expects everything to be just so. And so with her, when she comes in, of course, she first off complains about the fact that nobody was at the train station to meet them. Her and Major Metcalf, who they happen to meet up in the middle. They don't really know each other, but they were traveling to the same place. Thankfully, I guess, because nobody was there to help her at all. You know, she needs help. But she's just like, every train should have been met if you didn't know which one I was coming on. That's obnoxious. Like, nobody's going to sit there all day waiting just for your train to show up. And then, of course, she starts dogging on everything. Like, she tells Molly, I thought this was a fully staffed hotel. Like, I was led to believe that. You misled me. Like, how am I supposed to get anything around here if there's nobody here to serve me? And blah, blah, blah. She's always just, like, dogging something. And then she even goes to the extent of saying, I don't really like this place. I can't imagine that I have to stay somewhere that's not fully staffed. And the weather. And of course, Molly's like we could control the weather. But that's not obviously anything that can be controlled by a human being. Giles, though, he gets a little sneaky here. And he's like, you're more than welcome to leave. You don't have to stay here. We have plenty of guests. And of course, Mrs. Boyle's like, excuse me, I'm not leaving. I'm staying right here. And so, of course, they shuffle her off to her room. And Molly's just like, oh, good going, good going. You did a great job trying to get rid of her and like, shutting her up, basically. Our next character, of course, Major Metcalf. He's a little boring. He's about 40, maybe 45. He's a retired veteran. Well, I should say a retired military man. He's now a veteran. Very kind of prim and proper. There's nothing really exciting about him. So we'll obviously talk about him a little bit later. We learn more about him in the story. But as of right now, he's just kind. He's respectful. He's helpful. Those are mostly positive traits. So there's nothing really negative about him unless you want to put down that he's bland. That's probably something to put down about him. Our next character is Miss Casewell. Miss Casewell's the fun one. She is a manly woman. She is very much she represents that like independent, I don't need anybody in my life kind of person. And she's very blunt about her manliness. She comes in, she goes to the fireplace and she stands with her legs open, kind of like a man, just kind of like standing and put the legs apart. She's not very feminine at all. She shakes both Giles and Molly's hand really vigorously, it says inside the parentheses. And she's also kind of about like she wants to see what people react to. And so in her like effort to see what their reactions are, she says things that are kind of iffy, right? So like she says, you guys heard about that murder? They said that it was a sex maniac, right? And she's just kind of, obviously nobody said it was a sex maniac, but she's pushing buttons. She just kind of wants to see how people react to her. And of course, she's also a little sly because she's like, that description, which of course we know the description is that it was a man type figure wearing a dark overcoat, a slight scarf, and a soft felt hat. That description, she's like, well, it could be anybody. You don't know who it could be, right? And of course, so that's just kind of leading us on. And we do notice at this point that both Giles and Casewell both have some of those items. Giles specifically has all three of those items, the overcoat, the scarf, and the hat. Miss Casewell has the overcoat and the scarf, no hat. Easily could have lost it in the snow, maybe? Who knows? But that would be something to put down as reason to suspect as well in your journal. Our last character for scene 1 is Mr. Paravicini. Now, Mr. Paravicini was not expected. He was an unexpected character who came out of nowhere. He knocks on the door. Giles is kind of like taken back. So is Molly, because they're like, we weren't expecting anybody else. And of course, the snowstorm is starting to rage, which is the typical way a murder mystery happens. People, they get stuck inside a house because of a snowstorm or something keeps them from leaving. And then, of course, that's when the whole like actual play plays out, right? That's the whole point. So with Mr. Paravicini, he's the wrench in the situation. We don't know who he is. We weren't expecting him. They have no place for him except for that little bitty room. And he is kind of odd. They do talk about how he is a dark man, so most likely Indian, like from India. But he has this flamboyant mustache, and of course, if you've ever seen any type of murder mystery movie, they typically have the man with the curly little mustache. I'll show you a picture in just a second. His name was not Mr. Paravicini, but the man with the big mustache. In all the previous stories and stuff like that that Agatha Christie wrote, and anytime you see him in movies, his name is Hercule Poirot. So you'll notice that in the story that he mentions that this man, this Mr. Paravicini, is very dark and Indian, but had an air like he was Hercule Poirot, which kind of throws the reader off. And they say that because if you've ever read an Agatha Christie, or you've ever watched, for instance, Murder on the Orient Express, you will think that maybe a man with a handlebar or like curled mustache is a man who should be taking care of the situation. He should be trustworthy. He should be the man. But that's not exactly how it is with Mr. Paravicini. And we can see that pretty quickly. He is a questionable character. He kisses Molly's hand, and then he's like, my Rolls Royce got swept off the road in a snowdrift. The snow is terrible. So I grabbed my little bag, and he's so dramatic. He's like, I walked and I thought this would be my last night, and then I saw the iron gates, and oh, joy, fear turned into joy. And then, of course, Giles says, do you think maybe we should go back and get your luggage? And he's like, no. Everything I need is in this little bag that I have. Nothing else matters. And he's like, but what about, he's like, there's not going to be any robbers. Don't worry. It'll be fine. I locked the car. And so you kind of start to wonder whether or not he's trying to hide something. Let me show you real quick, though, while we're here. Hercule Poirot. Here is our lovely Hercule Poirot. You see this lovely mustache. My goodness, a strong mustache. This is also the older Hercule Poirot. Still a little bit of a mustache here, but there's nothing that really can beat this amazing mustache. I don't think so. That's just me, of course. I think he's got a pretty great mustache. All right. So going back to the story real quick. Let me see where I was. So with Mr. Paravicini. So of course Mr. Paravicini is just, kind of avoiding everything, kind of just setting himself up to be suspicious. There's a moment where he says that, ah, yes, I am the unexpected guest, the guest that you did not invite, the guest who just arrived from nowhere, out of the storm. It sounds quite dramatic, does it not? Who am I? You do not know. Where do I come from? You do not know. Me? I am the man of mystery. Yeah, he's questionable. And he definitely remains questionable as we continue going through the story. He kind of starts to look around, as you probably saw right at the end. I had y'all, of course, stop at the end of scene 1, so I won't go too much into scene 2, but I will, of course, do another video for scene 2 after